Chapter 3. The evening is a strange and unsettling one. It is 8 o'clock at night by the time I arrive at the inn, so even my sense of direction is somewhat confused, let alone my grasp of the layout of the house and the type of garden it has. I am taken along a very winding passageway of some sort, and finally shown into a small, 6-mat-sized room. The place is quite unlike my memory of it from the previous visit. I have my dinner, take a bath, return to my room, and am sipping tea when the maid arrives and offers to lay out the bedding. The strange thing is that it is this same maid who has done everything since I arrived, answering the door to me, serving the evening meal, showing me to the bathhouse, and now laying out my bed. What's more, she has scarcely spoken a word, though she doesn't seem particularly countrified in her ways. Earlier I followed behind this girl as she wound along the endless passageway come staircase to my room, a chastely knotted red obi around her waist and an old-fashioned oil taper in her hand, and then I followed the same obi and oil taper down the same passageway come staircase, on and on, as she led me to the bathhouse, feeling almost as if I was a figure coming and going in a painting. While serving my evening meal, she apologizes that I have to put up with a room normally used for other purposes, since the recent lack of guests means the guest rooms haven't been cleaned. Later, as she leaves after preparing the bedding, she says a gentle, slow goodnight that has some human warmth to it. But after her footsteps have grown distant and vanished down the twisting corridor, all is hushed and still, and I am uncomfortably aware of the lack of any sense of human presence in the place. I have had this experience only once before. It was the time I traveled across Boshu Province 1 from Tateyama and followed the coast around on foot between Kazusa and Chosha. One night I stayed at a certain place along the road. I can't put it any more clearly, since both the name of the area and the name of the inn are now quite forgotten. In fact, I'm not even sure it was an inn where I stayed. It was a high-roofed house, containing only 2 women. I asked if they could put me up. The older woman said yes, and the younger invited me to follow her. We passed through a number of large, dilapidated rooms to the farthest room, on the mezzanine floor. Having mounted the 3 steps from the corridor, I was about to enter the room when a clump of bamboo leaning in under the eaves swayed in the evening breeze and brushed its leaves over me from shoulder to head, sending a chill down my spine. The balcony boards were rotting. I observed to the girl that in another year the bamboo shoots would penetrate the balcony and the room would become overwhelmed by bamboo, but her only response was to grin and leave. That night I couldn't sleep for the rustling of the bamboo near my pillow. Opening the screen doors to the balcony, I looked out and discovered that the garden was a sea of grass. I let my eyes travel out over the scene through the bright summery moonlight. The grass flowed on into a great grassy hill beyond, without any intervening hedge or wall. Directly beyond the hill the breakers of the mighty ocean thundered in to menace the world of man. I didn't sleep a wink until dawn, and as I lay there grimly, hour upon hour inside the eerie tent of the mosquito net, I thought I had strayed into the gothic realm of those popular romantic tales of a previous era. I have been on many journeys since then, but never again until this night in McCoy have I had a similar experience. Lying there on my back, I happened to open my eyes and notice hanging above the sliding doors a piece of calligraphy framed in red lacquer. Even from where I lie, I can clearly read the words, "Bamboo shadows sweep the stair, but no dust moves." Too, I can also make out that the signature seal gives the calligrapher's name as Daitetsu. Now I am in no way a connoisseur of calligraphy, but I have always loved the style of the Obaku Zen priest Kozen. There's a lot to be said for the calligraphy of Ingen, Sokuhi, and Mokuan as well, but Kozen's writing is the most powerful and meticulous. Looking at these 7 characters before me now, both the handling of the brush and the flow of the writing hand convince me that it must be the work of Kozen. But this cannot be so, as the signature is Daitetsu. I consider the possibility that there might also have been a priest named Daitetsu in the Obaku sect at that time, but the paper looks far too new. It can surely only be a recent work. I turn on my side. Now my eyes take in the painting of cranes by Jakucho that hangs in the alcove. Point 4 art being my line of work, I registered this as a superb piece when I first entered the room. Most of Jakucho's works have a quite delicate coloration, but this crane is executed with a single defiant brushstroke. The feather-light, egg-shaped body poised jauntily on its single leg has a wonderful rightness to it, and the sense of nonchalant ease continues right down to the tip of the beak. Beside the alcove is a single shelf with a cupboard beyond. What is in the cupboard I cannot tell. I slip into a peaceful sleep, into dream. The Nagara maiden in her long-sleeved kimono is riding over the mountain pass on a white horse when suddenly the Sazeda man and the Sazade man leap out on her from either side and both begin to pull at her. The girl now suddenly becomes Ophelia, lying upon a drifting willow branch in the water's flow, singing beautifully. I pick up a long pole and race along the bank in search of a place from which to rescue her, but she floats away and is lost to sight, singing and smiling, apparently perfectly at ease. I stand calling desperately after her, the pole over my shoulder. Then I awaken. My armpits are soaked with sweat. What an extraordinary jumble of the poetic and the vulgar that dream was. I think in bemusement. The early Zen priest Day is said to have suffered greatly from the fact that even the enlightened mind, which has mastered the illusion of reality, is still troubled by dreams of the vulgar world. I can quite see his point. One whose calling in life is the arts surely doesn't cut much of a figure if his dreams aren't a bit more tasteful than the norm. I roll over, thinking to myself that most of my dream is quite useless from the point of view of a painting or a poem, and suddenly moonlight is pouring in through the paper screen doors onto the balcony, steeping them with the slanting shadows of several branches from the tree beyond. It is a brilliantly clear spring night. Perhaps I am imagining it, but I think I can hear someone softly singing. I strain to catch the sound, wondering whether the song of my dream has somehow slipped out into the real world, or whether a voice from the real world has insinuated itself into the distant realm of my dream. Yes, someone is definitely singing. Small, low voice though it is, a thin thread of sound is pulsing faintly in the sleepy spring night. Strangely, it's not only the melody that comes to me. When I concentrate, I can also make out the song's words, though catching them from such distant singing would seem impossible. They are repeating over and over the song of the Nagara maiden as the autumn's dew. That lies a moment on the tips of the seeding grass. So do I know that I too must fade and be gone from this brief world. At first the voice sounds quite close to the balcony, but it grows gradually fainter and more distant. When a thing finishes abruptly, you register the abruptness. Chapter 4. When I return, dazed, to my room, I see that it has indeed been beautifully cleaned. The previous night's events still rather disturb me, so I open the cupboard just to check. Inside stands a small chest, and from the top drawer a used-dyed soft obi is half tumbled out, suggesting that someone has seized a piece of clothing in haste and quickly departed. The upper part of the obi is hidden from view beneath alluringly gaudy clothing. To one side is a small pile of books. Topmost are a volume of the Zen Master Hakuin's sermons and the first volume of the Tales of Ice. 1. That apparition of the previous night may well have been real. Idly plumping myself down on a cushion, I discover that my sketchbook has been placed on the elegant imported wood desk, carefully laid open with the pencil still tucked between its pages. I pick it up, wondering how those poems I feverishly jotted down in the night will read the next morning. Beneath the poem, the maddened woman, setting the dewdrops trembling. On the Aronia. Someone has added the crow at dawn, setting the dewdrops trembling. On the Aronia. Because it is written in pencil, I can gain no clear sense of the writing style, but it looks too firm for a woman's hand and too soft for a man's. Here's another surprise. Looking at the next poem, Shadow of Blossoms. Shadowed form of a woman. Hazy on the ground. I see that the person has added below it Shadow of Blossoms. Shadowed form of a woman. Doubled and overlaid. Beneath Inari's fox god. Has changed to a woman's shape. Under the hazed moon. Is written Yan Yoshitsune. Has changed to a woman's shape. Under the hazed moon. 2. I tilt my head in puzzlement as I read, at a loss to know whether the additions are intended as imitations, corrections, elegant poetic exchanges, foolishness, or mockery. Later, she said, so perhaps she is about to appear with my breakfast. Once she's here, I'll probably be able to make a little more sense of things. Happening to glance at my watch, I see it's past 11. How well I slept. Given the lateness of the hour, I'd be better off making do with only lunch. I slide the right-hand screen door open onto the balcony and look out, in search of echoes of last night's scene. The tree that I judged to be in Aronia is indeed so, but the garden is smaller than I thought. 5 or 6 stepping stones are buried in a carpet of green moss. It would feel very nice to walk there barefoot. To the left is a cliff face, part of the mountain beyond, with a red pine slanting out over the garden from between rocks. Behind the Aronia is a small clump of bushes, and beyond a stand of tall bamboo, it's 90 feet of green drenched in sunlight. The scene to the right is cut off by the roofline of the building, but judging from the lay of the land, it must slope gently down toward the bathhouse. Casting my eyes farther, I see that the mountain slopes down to a hill, which in turn sinks to an area of flat land about 400 yards wide. This in turn dives below sea level, to emerge abruptly from the water about 40 miles out, in the form of Miyajima, a small island that I guess to be less than 15 miles in circumference. Such is the geography of the Nakoi area. The hot spring inn is tucked in against the mountainside, its garden half embracing the cliff face. The building is a 2-storied one, but here at the back, owing to the slope, it becomes a single floor. If I dangled my feet from this balcony, my heels would brush the moss. It makes perfect sense that the previous evening I thought the place to be strangely devised, as I clambered in perplexity up and down its steep staircases. Now I open the window to the left. Before me is a wide rock, naturally hollowed out in the middle. The reflection of a wild cherry tree lies steeping in the still pool of water accumulated there from the recent spring rain. 2 or 3 clumps of dwarf bamboo are elegantly positioned to soften the angle of the rock. Beyond stands a hedge of what looks like red-berried cuco bushes. The sound of occasional passing voices suggests that directly beyond the hedge lies the steep road that climbs from the beach to the hill. The gentle southward slope on the farther side of the road is planted with a grove of mandarin trees, and at the edge of the valley another large stand of bamboo shines white in the sun. I have never realized till now that bamboo leaves give off a silver light when seen from a distance. A pine-clad mountainside rises above the bamboo grove, with 5 or 6 stone steps leading up between the pine's red trunks, so clearly visible I feel I can reach out and touch them. There must be a temple there. I next open the sliding door that leads off the corridor to my room and go out onto the porch beyond. The railing runs around 4 sides of an inner garden, and across it, in the direction from which I guess the sea would be visible, stands a second-floor room. From the railing, I can see that my own room is level with this second floor, a tasteful arrangement. Given that the bathing area is below ground level, I could be said to be ensconced in a room at the top of a 3-tiered tower. The building is a large one, but aside from the room opposite, and another that is level with my railing around to the right, almost every space that looks likely to be a guest room, I know nothing of the living area or kitchen, is closed up. There must be virtually no guests here apart from myself. The outer wooden shutters remain closed over the sealed rooms even during the day, but once opened, it seems they aren't closed again even at night. Perhaps the front door is not locked at night either. It's an ideal place for me to happen upon in my journey to savor artistic non-motion. By now it's nearly 12, but there is still no sign of my meal. I'm beginning to feel distinctly hungry, but I set about mentally identifying myself with the hermit poet in his words vast empty mountains, no one to be seen, and manage to induce a state in which I feel not the least regret at having to skimp a little. 3 Drawing a picture feels like too much trouble just now, and as for coming up with a poem, my mind is already immersed in the poetic. To actually compose something would be merely a waste of breath. Nor do I have any inclination to undo the box of 2 or 3 books that I've brought along, tied to my tripod, and read. I feel perfect happiness simply lolling here on the balcony in the company of the shadow cast by the blossoms, my back toasting in the warm spring sunlight. To think would be to sink into error. Movement seems perilous. I would cease even to breathe if I could. I want to live like this for a whole fortnight, motionless, like a plant rooted deep in the floor beneath me. At last footsteps are heard coming along the corridor and climbing the stairs. Listening, I realize that 2 people are approaching. The footsteps stop before my room, then one person wordlessly retreats. The sliding door opens, and I guess it will be the woman I saw earlier that morning, but in fact it's the maid of the previous evening who enters. I register a touch of disappointment. I'm sorry this is so late. She sets down the tray table containing my lunch. There is no explanation for the lack of breakfast. The tray contains a plate with a grilled fish and a garnishment of greenery, and when I lift the lid of the bowl beside it, a red and white prawn is revealed nestling there in a bed of fresh fern shoots. I gaze into the bowl, savoring the colors. Don't you like it? Asks the maid. No, I'm just about to have it, I reply, but in fact it looks too beautiful to eat. I once read somewhere an anecdote about the artist Turner at a banquet, remarking to his neighbor as he gazed at the salad piled on the plate before him that this cool fresh color was the sort he himself used. I would love to show Turner the color of these fern shoots and prawn. Not a single Western food has a color that could be called beautiful. The only exceptions I can think of are salad and radishes. I'm in no position to speak of its nutritional value, but to the artist's eye it is a thoroughly uncivilized cuisine. On the other hand, artistically speaking, everything on a Japanese menu, from the soups to the hors d'oeuvres to the raw fish, is beautifully conceived. If you did no more than gaze at the banquet tray set before you at an elegant restaurant, without lifting a chopstick, and then go home again, the feast for the eyes would have been more than sufficient to make the visit worth your while. There's a young lady in the household, isn't there? I inquire as I put down the bowl. Yes. Who is she? She's the young mistress. Is there an older mistress here as well? She died last year. What about the master? Yes, he's here. She's his daughter. You mean the young lady? Yes. Are there any other guests? No one. I'm the only one. Yes. How does the young mistress spend her days? Well, she sews. What else? She plays the shamisen. This is a surprise. Intrigued, I continue. And what else? She visits the temple, replies the maid. This is also surprising. There's something peculiar in this visiting temples and playing the shamisen. She goes there to pray? No, she visits the priest. Is the priest learning the shamisen, then? No. Well, why does she go there? She visits Mr. Daitetsu. Ah yes, this must be the same Daitetsu who did the framed piece of calligraphy above my door. To judge from its content, he's clearly a Zen priest. That volume of Hakuin sermons in the cupboard, then, must be her personal property. Who normally uses this room? The young mistress is normally here. So she would have been here until I arrived last night? Yes. I'm sorry I've turned her out. So what does she go to Mr. Daitetsu's place for? I don't know. What else, then? Sorry. What else does she do? Various things. What sort of things? I don't know. The conversation comes to a halt. I finish my meal, and the maid withdraws the tray table. When she slides open the door to leave, suddenly there beyond, on the second-floor balcony across the shrubs of the little inner garden, I see revealed the head of that same woman, under its ikogishi curves of hair. Her cheek rests elegantly upon a raised hand, and her gaze is directed downward like the enlightened figure of the willow branch canon bodhisattva. For in contrast to my earlier sight of her that morning, she now presents a deeply serene figure. Doubtless it's because her face is lowered and her eyes do not so much as quiver in my direction that her features are transformed in this way. It used to be said that the eye is the finest thing in the human form, and certainly its incomparably vivid expressiveness will always shine through. Beneath the railing with its twisted patterning where she quietly leans, 2 butterflies flutter upward, now drawing together, now dancing apart. Because my door has been opened suddenly, the woman swiftly raises her eyes from the butterflies toward my room. Her gaze pierces the air between us like a poisoned dart and falls upon my brow without a flicker of recognition or greeting. Before I can recover from my astonishment, the maid has once more clapped the door shut, leaving behind her the easygoing indifference of spring. I settle down to sprawl on the mat once more. The following lines spring immediately to mind, sadder than is the moon's lost light. Lost ere the kindling of dawn, to travelers journeying on, the shutting of thy fair face from my sight. Point 6. Imagine that I have fallen in love with the figure I've just seen, and have determined to dedicate my life itself to achieving a meeting with her, only to be smitten at that very instant by such a parting glance as this, a glance that fills my being with astonished delight or anguish. In that state I would undoubtedly have written just such sentiments in just such a poem as this. I might even have added the next 2 lines, might I look on thee in death. With bliss I would yield my breath. Happily, I am by now well past any susceptibility to the triteness of love and heartache, and I couldn't become afflicted with such agonies even should I wish it. Yet these few lines are richly redolent with the poetry of the event that has just occurred. Though in fact no such painful longing binds me to the figure opposite, I find it amusing to project our relationship into the scene of this poem, and to apply the poem's sentiments to our present situation. A thin karmic thread winds between us, linking us through something the poem holds that is true to this moment. But a karmic bond that consists of such a very tenuous thread is scarcely, after all, a burdensome matter. Nor is it any ordinary thread, it is like some rainbow arching in the sky, a mist that trails over the plain, a spider's web glittering in the dew, a fragile thing that, though marvelously beautiful to the eye, must snap at the first touch. What if this thread were to swell before my eyes into the sturdy thickness of a rope? I wonder. But there's no danger of this. I am an artist. And she is far from the common run of woman. The door suddenly slides open again. I roll over to see, and there stands my karmic companion, poised on the threshold, bearing a tray that holds a green celadon bowl. You're sleeping again, are you? I must have disturbed you last night. I do keep disturbing you, don't I? And she laughs. She shows not the least sign of shyness or concealment, let alone embarrassment. She has simply seized the initiative. Thank you for your help this morning, I say again. This is the 3rd time I've responded with a brief polite formula, I realize, and furthermore it has consisted each time simply of the words thank you. I am about to rise, but she swiftly seats herself on the floor beside me. Oh, don't get up. We can talk as you lie there, she says airily. That's true enough, I think, and for the time being I content myself with rolling over onto my stomach and lying chin in hands, elbows propped on the matting. I thought you must be bored, so I've made you some tea. Thank you. There are those words again. The plate of tea sweets contains some splendid slices of the firm bean jelly known as yokan happens to be my very favorite tea sweet. Not that I particularly want to eat it, but that velvety, dense texture, with its semi-translucent glow, makes it a work of art by any standards. I especially enjoy the sight of yokan that has a slightly blue-green sheen, like a mixture of gemstones and alabaster, and this bluish yokan piled on the plate glistens as if it has just this moment been born from within the celadon, so that my hand almost twitches with the urge to reach out and stroke it. No Western sweet gives this degree of pleasure. The color of cream is quite soft, I grant you, but it's rather oppressive. Jelly looks at first sight like a jewel, but it trembles and lacks the weightiness of yokan. And as for those tiered pagodas of white sugar and milk, they're simply execrable. That looks splendid. Genbei has just brought it back from town. I imagine you'd be happy to eat something like this. Genbei appears to have spent the night in town. I make no reply but simply continue to gaze at the yokan. I have no interest in who has brought it or from where. I'm more than happy simply to be registering a beautiful thing as beautiful. This celadon plate has a very fine shape. A wonderful color too. It's scarcely inferior to the yokan, I remark. She titters, and a faint, contemptuous smirk plays for a moment on her lips. She must have interpreted my words as intended to be clever. Considered thus, my remark does indeed deserve to be despised. It's exactly the kind of thing a stupid man will come out with in a misguided attempt to sound sophisticated. Is it Chinese? What? She isn't aware of the plate at all. It certainly looks like it to me, I say, lifting the plate to examine the inscription on its base. If you like this sort of thing, I can show you more. Yes, please do. My father loves antiques, so there are a lot of such things here. I'll tell him you're interested, and you can have tea together sometime so he can show you. I shrink a little at the mention of tea. No one is more tediously pompous than a tea ceremony master, who will fancy himself the quintessence of elegant refinement. Your typical tea master is deeply conceited, not to mention affected and fastidious to a fault. He ostentatiously clings to the cramped little territory he's marked out for himself within the wide world of sensibility, savoring his bowl of foam and bubbles with a quite ridiculous reverence. If that abominably complex set of rules and regulations that makes up the tea ceremony contains any refinement, then a crack army corps must positively reek of elegant sophistication. All those right about turn, quick march, fellows must to a man be the equivalent of the great tea masters. The art of the tea ceremony is something that the common merchant and townsman, lacking any education in the finer matters of taste, dreamed up through their ignorance of how refinement really works, by mindlessly swallowing whole and in mechanical fashion the rules that were invented after Riku's Day. 7 Their pitiful conviction that it constitutes the height of refinement only makes a mockery of true sensibility. When you say tea, you mean the ceremonial sort? No, there's no ceremony about it at all. It's the kind of tea you don't have to drink if you don't want to. Well then, I'd be more than happy to have a cup while I'm there. She titters again. My father loves to have someone to show his collection to. Does that mean I have to praise his things? He's an old man, so he'd be thrilled if you did. Alright, I'll give them a bit of praise, then. Oh, come on, why not make it a discount and praise them lots? It's my turn to laugh. By the way, I remark, you don't use the language of a country girl, do you? You mean, even though I have the character of one? As to character, country people are better than city folk. Well then, I've got the upper hand there. But you must have spent time in Tokyo, surely? Yes, and in Kyoto too. I'm a wanderer, so I've been all over the place. Which do you prefer, this village or Tokyo? There's no difference. Doesn't life feel easier in a quiet place like this? Easy, difficult, you can make it whatever you want, depending on your state of mind. There's no point in moving to the land of mosquitoes because you're sick of the land of fleas. You could go to a land of neither fleas nor mosquitoes. If you know such a place, go ahead and show me. Go on, she persists, leaning closer. Show me. I'll show you if you want, I say, picking up my sketchbook, and I draw, not a picture, since it's done quite on impulse, just a hasty sketch of a woman on horseback looking at a mountain cherry tree. Here, I say, thrusting it under her nose, come inside this world. There are no fleas or mosquitoes here. Will she register surprise? Embarrassment. I watch her, certain that she won't be upset. She evades the problem by dismissing it. What a cramped little world it is, she exclaims. It has only length and breadth. You like this sort of two-dimensional world? A crab is what you are. I burst out laughing. The bush warbler that has just begun to call by the eave breaks off his song at the sound and flies away to a farther branch. We both pause in our talk and listen intently for a while, but once interrupted that voice will not easily begin again. You met Genbei on the mountain yesterday, didn't you? Yes. And did you visit the grave of the Nagara maiden on your way here? I did. As the autumn's dew that lies a moment on the tips of the seeding grass, so do I know that I too must fade and be gone from this brief world, she recites swiftly, without any modulation to her voice. I can't guess what has prompted her. Yes, I heard that poem at the tea house yesterday. The old lady told you, did she? She came as a servant to our house originally, you know, before I went off as she begins, then casts me a quick glance to see how I'll react. I feign ignorance. It was while I was still young. Every time she came I'd tell her the story of the Nagara maiden. She could never remember the poem, but eventually she heard it so often that she did manage to memorize it all. Aha, so that's it. I must say I wondered how she came to know something so difficult. But it's a touching poem, isn't it? Is it touching? I wouldn't compose a poem like that, myself. To begin with, how silly to go throwing yourself into a pool. Yes, I suppose it is, now that you mention it. What would you do? There's no question what I'd do. The only thing to do is to have the two men as your paramours. Both of them? Yes. You're amazing. There's nothing amazing about it. It's perfectly obvious. Yes, I see. In that case you wouldn't have to commit yourself to either the flea world or the mosquito world, would you? One can get by in life without having to think like a crab, after all. At this moment the half-forgotten bush warbler, its full energy restored, bursts out with a startlingly splendid high-pitched call. Fuho keikyo. Once revitalized, the lilting calls begin to flow forth again seemingly of their own accord. Body flung upside down, as the famous haiku has it, 8 the base of its swelling throat a tremble, its small mouth almost split open with the fullness of its song, as the bird calls again and again. Fuho keikyo. Fuho keikyo. Now that is real poetry, she says firmly. Chapter 5. Pardon my asking, but I'm guessing you're from Tokyo, are you, sir? I look like a Tokyo man, do I? Look like it. Why, a single glance. First off, I can tell just from hearing you speak. Can you tell whereabouts in Tokyo? Yes, well, Tokyo's awful big, ain't it? But I'd make a stab it's not the downtown part. Uptown Yamanote area, I'd say. Maybe Kojimachi? No. Well then, Kashigawa? Well, it must be Ushigome or Yotsuya, then? Not too far wrong, yes. You certainly know your Tokyo, don't you? You wouldn't know it to look at me, but I'm an old Tokyoite myself. So that's it. I could tell you had some style. He chuckles. Not a bit of it. Just look at me now, misery that I am. So how did you end up spending your days in a place like this? No kidding, you've hit the nail on the head there, sir. End up here is exactly what I've done. Just couldn't make ends meet. Have you always been boss of a barbershop? Not a boss, a worker. What's that? Where, you say? I worked in Matsunagacho in Kanda. Tiny filthy little place it is, Matsunagacho, not even room to swing a cat. The likes of you wouldn't have heard of it. You know Ryukenbashi Bridge? What? Don't know that either. Ryukenbashi, famous bridge. Hey, could you soak that up a bit more? It's hurting. Hurts YA, does it? I'm the fussy type. YA no, not happy till I can dig right in and get every hair on your face. Like this, shaven against the grain, see? Not something your barber of today does. Oh no, he just strokes, he does. You just put up with it a bit longer. I've been putting up with a lot for quite a while now. Come on, add a bit more hot water or soap, can't you? Can't take it, huh? It didn't ought to be that painful. Your whiskers have gotten too long, that's what the problem is. Reluctantly, he lets go of the pinch of flesh he's been gripping on my cheek. Then he takes down a wafer of red soap from the shelf, dips it briefly in cold water, and without further ado quickly runs it all over my face. I'm not at all used to the experience of having raw soap rubbed over me like this, nor am I too impressed with the water he dips it in, which looks as if it's been sitting there who knows how long. My rights as a barbershop customer compel me to face a mirror. For some time now, however, I must admit I have felt the urge to forego this privilege. A mirror fulfills its allotted purpose only if it has a flat surface that reflects the human face without distortion. If you set up a mirror that fails to meet these requirements and force a man to face it, you are committing willful damage to his features quite as much as does the bad photographer. The destruction of a man's vanity is no doubt a valuable aid to the cultivation of character, but there's no need to show a man a face that does less than justice to his own, then insult him by asserting that it is himself. The mirror that I'm at present compelled to gaze into has been thus insulting me for some considerable time. If I turn to the right, my face is all nose, while the left profile splits my face from mouth to ear. When I raise my head, my features are squashed flat, with an effect reminiscent of looking face-on at a toad. If I lower my face a little, my forehead suddenly towers like some freakish fairy child of the long-headed god Fukurokuju.1. So long as I sit before this mirror, I am forced to double as all manner of ghoulish monster. Of course there's no getting around the fact that my own face is far from a thing of beauty, but the glaring defects of this mirror, its poor color, and the mottled patches of light where the reflective backing has peeled off, surely make it a supremely ugly thing in its own right. Granted that only a fool will take to heart the abuses heaped on him by an obnoxious child, nevertheless no one enjoys spending any length of time in the presence of the insulting brat. And it's not only the mirror, this barber is no ordinary barber, either. When I first peered into the shop, I found him sitting there cross-legged, looking mildly bored, drawing at his long-stemmed pipe and sending a constant stream of smoke over a toy flag set celebrating the Anglo-Japanese alliance that hung on his wall. Point 2. But now that I'm inside and have entrusted my head to his ministrations, this benign impression has received a shock. He wrenches and maws so mercilessly, as he scrapes away at the whiskers, that I'm almost at a loss to decide whether I still hold any right of possession to my own head or whether all such power has now officially passed to him. At this rate, even were my head nailed firmly to my shoulders, it wouldn't survive intact for long. During the time he is wielding the razor, this man becomes not barber but barbarian, quite beyond the accepted rules of civilization. Even while the razor is merely going over my cheeks, it rasps and grates. When it sets to work by my ear, the artery in my temple leaps in panic, and as the fearsome blade flashes at my chin, it produces an extraordinary crunching sound, like ice being crushed underfoot. And this is a barber who fancies himself the most consummate in the land. To top it off, he's drunk. An odd smell envelops me whenever he draws his slurs at my ear, and from time to time my nostrils are assailed by a peculiar vapor. When and how his razor may slip, and where it will fly when it does so, only fate can decide. I'm in no position to be able to guess myself, having yielded my face to his ministrations. Even he who wields the blade has no clear idea of his razor's aim, heaven knows. I've surrendered myself to him on a mutual understanding, so I don't intend to complain about the odd nick I might receive, but if matters suddenly took a nasty turn and I were to have my windpipe sliced open, that would be quite another matter. Only a greenhorns shave this way with soap, but it can't be helped, with your tough whiskers, sir, he remarks, tossing the wet bit of soap unceremoniously back onto the shelf. The soap, however, refuses to obey and instead slithers off and tumbles to the ground. Haven't seen you around much, sir, he continues. Come here recently, did you? Just a couple of days ago. That's so. Where are you based? I'm staying at Chioda's. A guest there, eh? That's what I thought. Matter of fact, I'm here thanks to the old gentleman myself. See, he was down the road from me when he was up in Tokyo. That's how I got to know him. Good fellow. Knows a thing or two. His lady wife died last year, and he spends all his time messing about with his collection of stuff these days. Got some fantastic things, they say. They'd fetch a fine price if he sold them, the story goes. There's a pretty daughter there too, isn't there? You wanna watch out for her. Why so? Why? Well, I shouldn't be telling tales, but she's back from a failed marriage, she is. Is that so? That's so to say the least of it. There weren't no cause for her to come back home really. She left because the bank went bust and they had to watch their pennies, no sense of duty. All very well while the old gentleman's still on his pins, but when worst comes to worst, well, it'll be a bad state of affairs. Will it then? Course it will. There's bad blood with the older brother in the main house. There's a main house, is there? Main house is up on the hill. Go take a look. Great view up there. Hey, a bit more soap there, please. It's hurting again. These whiskers of yours do a lot of hurting, I must say. Too tough, that's their problem. You need to put the razor to these at least once every 3 days, sir. If you think my shaving hurts, you won't stand a chance with any other barber. I'll do that. I could come along every day, if you like. You planning on spending that long here, are you? Watch out. Better not. No good will come of it. You let yourself get hooked by that good-for-nothing girl, there's no telling what will happen. Why's that? That girl of yours looks good, but she's a loony. Why? Why? Look, the whole village says she's crazy. There must be some mistake there, surely. No, there's more than proof enough. Look, best just drop the idea. Too risky. Don't you worry about me. So what proof is there? It's a weird story. Here, settle down and have a smoke if you like, and I'll tell you. Wash your hair for you. No, let's leave it at that. I'll just get rid of the dandruff, eh? Without further warning, the barber brings 10 filthy claws down hard onto my skull and commences to scrape them fiercely back and forth. His nails thrust themselves between every hair on my head, to and fro, with the speed and ferocity of a giant's rake whirling about over a barren wasteland. I don't know how many thousands of hairs my head holds, but as his fingers go gouging about, each one of them seems to be being ripped from its roots, and the surface that remains feels as if it's hatched all over in raised welts. The ferocious energy of those fingers transmits itself down through the skull and rattles my very brains. How's that? Feels pretty good, eh? You certainly have astonishing powers. Eh? A fine massage like that gives everyone a lift. I feel as if my head's about to fly off. Feeling limp and feeble, are we? It's all to do with the weather. Spring sure does make the old body go all floppy, doesn't it? Ah well, have a smoke. You'll be feeling bored, all alone there at Chioda's. Drop over for a chat. We old Tokyoites, we got lots in common the others wouldn't understand, eh? So that girl comes along and says hello to you, does she? No sense of right and wrong, that's the trouble with her. Weren't you just going to tell me something about her when suddenly dandruff was flying around and my head almost went with it? True enough, true enough. Can't keep a story together in this silly head of mine. Right, so then that priest fella gets all funny for her. What priest is that? That useless underling of a fellow at Kankaiji Temple. I haven't come across any priest in the story yet, underling or otherwise. That's so. Sorry, I'm a bit hasty. Fine figure of a fella he was, sort of priest who'd be hot for the ladies, bit of you-know-what. Ends up he sends a letter, hey there, hang on a moment. Did he come after her? Nah, it was a letter right enough. And then, there was, gone and gotten a bit muddled here. Ah, right, yes, that's it. Big surprise, right? Who got surprised? She did. She got a surprise when she received the letter. Well, it'd be another matter if she was the modest sort who'd get surprised, wouldn't it? Dear me, no, not her, nothing surprised that one. So who got surprised, then? The fellow what came after her. But you said he didn't come after her. Right. Got it around my neck a bit, too impatient. Gets a letter. So it was the woman, then. No, the man. You mean the priest? Sure, the priest. So why was the priest surprised? Why? Well, he's in the hall saying sutras with the abbot when suddenly in she rushes. The barber snickers. She's a loony right enough. Did she do something? If you love me so much, let's make love right here in front of the Buddha, says she, just like that, and she throws herself around Tyan's neck. Good heavens. Really shook him up, it did. Goes and sends a letter to a loony, and now just look at the shame she's caused him. So that night away he creeps, and puts an end to himself. He died. Must have. How could he live after a thing like that? How bizarre. Darn right. Still, if the other party's a loony, you'd be pretty depressed if you'd put an end to yourself. So maybe he's still alive, who knows? It's a fascinating story. Fascinating? Why, the whole village was laughing fit to bust. But as for her, she's crazy of course, so she just went about calm as you please, didn't turn a hair. Well, a fine sensible gentleman like yourself, sir, there'd be no trouble of that sort. But being who she is, you'd only have to tease her a bit, say, and who knows what mightn't happen. Perhaps I'll tread a bit carefully, then, I say with a laugh. A salty spring breeze wafts up from the warm shore, and the barbershop curtain over the door flaps drowsily. The reflection of a swallow flashes across the mirror as the slanting sheik comes diving in beneath the curtain to its nest under the eaves. An old man of 60 or so is squatting under the eaves of the house across the road, quietly shucking shellfish. Each click of his knife against a shell sends another red sliver of flesh tumbling into the depths of the bamboo basket, followed by a sudden glitter as another empty shell flies across a shimmering band of light to land 2 feet or so away. Is it oysters, or surf clams, or perhaps razor clams, lying there in that high mound of empty shells? Here and there the midden has collapsed, and some of its shells have slipped down to lie on the floor of the sandy stream behind, carried out of the transient world to a burial in the realm of darkness. No sooner is a shell's burial completed than a fresh one is added to the pile beneath the willow. The old man works on, tossing shell after shell through the shimmering sunlight, never pausing to ponder their fate. His basket seems bottomless, his spring day an endless tranquil expanse of time. The sandy stream runs beneath a little bridge a bare 12 feet or so long and bears its waters on toward the shore. Out there where its spring flow joins the shining spring sea, fathoms of fishing nets are looped up to dry in an uneven jumble of lengths. Perhaps it is these that impart to the soft breeze, blowing in through the nets to the village, a warm, pungent smell of fish. That sluggish silver visible beyond the nets, like a dull sword melted to a shimmering swim of molten metal, is the sea. This scene is utterly at odds with the barber beside me. If his character were more forceful, able to hold its own in my mind against the brilliance of the scene that lies all about him, I would be overwhelmed by the wild incongruity between the two. Fortunately, however, the barber is not so strikingly impressive. However overflowing he is with the old Tokyo's bravado, no matter how he might bluster and swagger, the man is no match for the vast and harmonious serenity of the circumambient air. This barber, who does his best to shatter the prevailing atmosphere with his display of self-satisfied garrulousness, has swiftly become no more than a tiny particle floating deep in the far reaches of the felicitous spring sunlight. A contradiction, after all, cannot arise where the relative strength, substance, or indeed spirit and body of the two elements are irreconcilable. It can be felt only when two things or people are on a similar level. If the discrepancy between them is too vast, all contradictory relationship may well finally evaporate and vanish, and the two instead come to play a single part in the great life force. For this reason the man of talent can act in the service of the great, the fool can be an assistant to the man of talent, and the ox and horse can support the fool. My barber is simply enacting a farce against the backdrop of the spring scene's infinity. Far from destroying the tranquility of spring, he is in fact achingly augmenting the sensation of it. I find myself savoring my chance encounter with such a happy-go-lucky pantomime buffoon on this vernal day. This ebullient braggart, all puff and no substance, provides in fact the perfect touch to set off the day's deep serenity. In this state of mind, it strikes me that my barber is a fine subject for a picture or a poem, so I remain squatting there companionably, chatting about this and that, long past the time I should have left. Then suddenly a little priest's shaved head slips in between the shop curtains. "Excuse me, could you do me a shave?" he says, and in he comes. He's a very jolly-looking little priest, in a white cotton gown with a padded rope belt and a black priest's robe of coarse gauze draped over it. "Rinnen, how's it going? I'll bet the abbot told you off the other day for dawdling, huh?" "Not a bit of it. He gave me a pat on the back." "Pat on the back because you went off on an errand and managed to pull out a fish while you were at it, huh?" "He said he was pleased I'd given myself such a good time. It goes to show I'm wiser than my years. No wonder your head's all swelled up like that. Just look at those lumps. Dreadful business to shave such a badly behaved noggin. Well, I'll let you off this time. But you just mold it into better shape before you bring it here again. If I have to remold it to suit you, it's easier to take it to a better barber." The barber laughs. "Head's shaped funny, but you sure got a quick tongue. As for you, your hands are hopeless at shaving, but they sure know how to lift a sake cup." "What do you mean hopeless at shaving? Goddamn you. I didn't say it, the abbot did. No need to lose your cool. Come on now, act your age. Sure MPH. No joke, isn't that right, mister?" "What? These priest types, they all live the easy life perched up there in their temples. No wonder their tongues get so quick off the mark. Even this young fella, he's forever shooting his mouth off. Oops, head to the side a bit to the side. I said, damn it, I'll give YA a cut if YA don't do as you're told, got that? There'll be blood, I'm warning YA. Hey, that hurts. Don't be so rough. This is nothing. How YA going to be a priest if YA can't put up with a bit of cane, huh? I'm already a priest. You're not the real thing yet. Speaking of which, why did that Tyan die? Tell me. But Tyen's not dead. Not dead. Fancy that. I was sure he died. He turned over a new leaf after all that happened, and he went off to Daibaiji Temple up in Rikuzen, to throw himself into his practice. He'll have reached enlightenment by now, I should think. It's a fine thing. What's fine about it? Never heard of no Buddhist teaching that says it's fine to do a flip like he did. You just look out. Why, hear me? Don't you go marking a fool of yourself with a woman. Speaking of women, that loony goes visiting the abbot, does she? I haven't heard of any loony woman. Get it through that thick bald skull, come on. Does she go or doesn't she? No loony goes to visit, but Shioda's daughter certainly does. The abbot can pray all he likes, there's no cure in that one. That ex-husband of hers has cursed her. She's a fine woman. The abbot has a lot of praise for her. Well, it beats me. Everything's topsy-turvy once you're up in that temple of yours. Whatever he says, a luna's a loony, right? That's your head done. Off you go quick smart, and get yourself a scolding from the abbot. No, I'd rather take my time about it and get a pat on the back instead. Do as you like, you impudent twerp. Pa, you're a shitass. What did you say? But the freshly shaved head has already ducked through the shop curtains and is out in the spring breeze. Chapter 6. It is evening. I settle at the desk, all the doors opened wide. Not only are there few people in this inn, but the building itself is relatively spacious, so that here in my room, separated as it is by winding corridors from the realm of human intercourse where those few dwell, not a sound comes to disturb my contemplations. And today all is quieter still. The master of the house, his daughter, and the male and female servants seem to have all departed and left me here alone, departed not to some ordinary place but to the land of mists perhaps, or to the realm of clouds. Or perhaps cloud and water have moved closer, so that their little boat drifts unawares upon a sea so calm that the hand is too languid to reach for the tiller, then floats off and away until the white sail seems to become one with water and cloud, until at last even the sail itself must scarcely know how it might differ from them. Perhaps it is to this distant realm that they have all departed. Or perhaps they have suddenly disappeared into the depths of the spring, their mortal bodies now transformed to spirit mists there in the vast reaches between heaven and earth, too insubstantial to be visible any longer even to the microscope's powerful eye. Or they have become skylarks, singing all day the delights of the mustard blossom's gold, and now, as the light fades, soaring to where the evening's deep violet trails its hues. Or perhaps as gadflies they have lengthened the long day with their labors, failing at the last to sip from the last flower center its sweet accumulated dew, and now they sleep a scented sleep, pillowed beneath some tumbled camellia blossom. Whatever may be the case, it certainly is quiet. The spring breeze that wafts emptily through the vacant house comes neither to gratify those who welcome it nor to spite those who would bar it. No, it is the spirit of the impartial universe, which comes of its own whim, and of its own whim departs again. Were my heart, as I sit here, chin cupped in propped palm, as empty as the room around me, the spring breeze would surely blow unbidden clean through it as well. Knowing that it is the earth that we tread, we learn to tread carefully, lest it be rent open. Realizing that it is the heavens that hang above us, we come to fear the echoing thunderbolt. The world demands that we battle with others for the sake of our own reputation, and so we undergo the sufferings bred of illusion. While we live in this world with its daily business, forced to walk the tightrope of profit and loss, true love is an empty thing, and the wealth before our eyes mere dust. The reputation we grasp at, the glory that we seize, is surely like the honey that the cunning bee will seem sweetly to brew only to leave his sting within it as he flies. What we call pleasure in fact contains all suffering, since it arises from attachment. Only thanks to the existence of the poet and the painter are we able to imbibe the essence of this dualistic world, to taste the purity of its very bones and marrow. The artist feasts on mists, he sips the dew, appraising this hue and assessing that, and he does not lament the moment of death. The delight of artists lies not in attachment to objects but in taking the object into the self, becoming one with it. Once he has become the object, no space can be found on this vast earth of ours where he might stand firmly as himself. He has cast off the dust of the solid self and become a traveler clad in tattered robes, drinking down the infinities of pure mountain winds. It's not because I wish to put on superior airs to browbeat those who are tainted with the marketplace that I thus strive to imagine this realm. My only intention is to tell the happy news of the salvation that lies there and to beckon those who have ears to hear. The fact of the matter is that the realms of poetry and art are already amply present in each one of us. Our years may pass unheeded until we find ourselves in groaning decrepitude, but when we turn to recollect our life and enumerate the vicissitudes of our history and experience, then surely we will be able to call up with delight some moment when we have forgotten our sullied selves. A moment that lingers still, just as even a rotting corpse will yet emit a faint glow. Anyone who cannot do so cannot call his life worth living. Yet the joys of the poet do not lie simply in immersing oneself in some moment, and becoming one with some particular object. At times one may become the petal of a flower or a pair of butterflies, or again like Wordsworth one may let one's heart be tossed in the blessed breeze as a crowd of daffodils. But there are also times when the ineffable beauty around one, some presence one can scarcely grasp, mysteriously masters the heart. One person will speak of being brushed by the shimmering winds of heaven and earth. Another will say he hears in his soul the harmonies of nature's ethereal harp. Yet another may describe lingering in some incomprehensible and inexplicable realm without boundary or limit, or wandering in the misty far reaches of the world. People may describe it as they will. Into just such a state of mind have I fallen as I sit here at my desk, spellbound and with a vacant gaze. Clearly I am thinking about nothing. I am most certainly looking at nothing. Since nothing is present to my consciousness to beguile me with its color and movement, I have not become one with anything. Yet I am in motion. Motion neither within the world nor outside it, simply motion. Neither motion as flower, nor as bird, nor motion in relation to another human, just ecstatic motion. If I were pressed to explain, I would want to say that my heart is moving with the spring. Or that some spirit, compounded of all the colors of spring, its breezes, its various elements, and its many voices, condensed, kneaded together into a magic potion that is then dissolved into an elixir in the realm of the immortals and condensed to a vapor in the warmth of Shangri-La's sunlight, such a spirit has slipped in, unbeknownst to me, through my pores and has saturated my heart. Normally some stimulant provokes a sense of oneness, and this is why the experience is enjoyable. But in this experience of mine I can't say what I've merged with, so it entirely lacks a specific stimulant. For this very reason, however, it produces a fathomless and inexpressible pleasure. I'm not speaking of some superficial and boisterous elation, waves tossed in the abstracted mind by a pummeling wind. No, rather my state is like a vast ocean that moves between one far continent and another above invisible depths of ocean floor. It lacks the vigor that this image suggests, but that is all to the good, for where great energy arises, a hidden fear of the time when that energy consumes itself and comes to an end is always present. In normal circumstances there is no such fear. And in my present, even more tenuous state, I am not only far removed from all such sorrow at the thought of a dwindling of sustaining energy, I am indeed quite freed from the everyday condition of man, in which the heart knows judgment of good and bad, right and wrong. I say that my state is tenuous only in the sense that it is ungraspable, not to suggest that it is unduly feeble. Poetic expressions such as sated with tranquility or sunk in a halcyon calm perhaps most fully and finely express such a state of mind. How might I go about expressing this state in terms of a picture? No ordinary picture could embody it, that's quite certain. What we express with the word picture amounts to no more than the scene before our eyes, human figures, or landscape, translated either just as it appears or through the filtering of aesthetic vision onto the surface we work on. If a flower looks like a flower, if water looks like water, and if human figures behave in the picture like humans, people consider the work of the picture done. A greater artist, however, will impart his own feelings as he depicts the phenomena and bring them to vivid life on the canvas. Such an artist endeavors to imbue the object he perceives with his own particular inspiration, and he does not feel he has created a picture unless his vision of the phenomenal world leaps from the brush as he paints. He will not venture to call a work his own if he does not feel that he has seen a certain thing in a certain way, thought in a certain way about it, and expressed that way of seeing and feeling with all due respect to the masters of his art, drawing sustenance from the old legends while nevertheless creating a work that is both utterly true and thoroughly beautiful. These two kinds of artists may differ in their objective and subjective approach and in their depth, yet before either one touches brush to paper, he will wait for a clear stimulus from the outside world. But the subject I wish to depict is not so clear. Though I use all my powers of sensation in order to find an equivalent for it in the outer world, no form, no color, indeed no light shade or dark, no firm or delicate line, suggests itself. What I feel does not originate from outside, or if it does not arise from any single scene present to my eye. I can point to no clearly visible cause for it. All that exists is a feeling. How might I express this feeling in terms of a picture? Or rather, what physical form might I borrow to embody it in a way that would make sense to others? This is the question. In an ordinary picture, it's sufficient to portray the object. Feeling is not in question. In the second kind of picture, the object must be compatible with feeling. In the third, all that exists is the feeling, so one is forced to choose some objective phenomenon as its expressive correlative. Such an object, however, is difficult to discover and, once discovered, difficult to make coherent. And even when it is coherently conceived, it often manifests itself in a form radically different from anything found in the natural world. An ordinary person, therefore, would not perceive it as a picture. Indeed, the artist himself acknowledges that it is not a reproduction of some select part of the natural world. He deems it a success if the feeling evoked at the moment of inspiration in some way translates itself onto the canvas, imparting a certain life to the mood that lies outside the sensuous realm, which is the work's true subject. I don't know whether any master has ever completely succeeded in performing this difficult task. If I were to name a few works that have approached success in this way, I could point to Wentong's Bamboo, and the landscape painting of the Ankoku school. The scenes created by Taigado and the human figures of Busan also come to mind. Point one is for Western artists. Their eyes are mostly fixed on the external phenomenal world, and the vast majority have had no truck with the higher realms of noble refinement, so I have no idea how many may have been able to impart some spiritual resonance to their depiction of an object. Unfortunately, the sort of grace and elegance that Sessue and Busan strove to depict is very simple and rather monotonous. 2. I could never approach these masters for their power of brushstroke, but the feeling behind my intended picture is more complex, and therefore difficult to summon and express within the single frame of a picture. I shift position, from chin propped on hands to leaning on folded arms on the desk before me, but still nothing dawns. I must somehow find the hues, forms, and tones that will stir in me as I paint, the sudden recognition that cries, "Ah, here it is. This is myself." I must paint with the lightning bolt of instantaneous and joyous discovery of a mother who has journeyed through all the realms of the land in search of her vanished son, never forgetting him for an instant, sleeping or waking, and then one day suddenly chances upon him at a crossroads. This is no easy task. If I can achieve it, the opinion of others will matter nothing to me. They can scorn and reject it as a painting, and I will feel no resentment. If the combination of colors I produce represents even a part of my feeling, if the play of the lines expresses even a fraction of my inner state, if the arrangement of the whole conveys a little of this sense of beauty, I will be perfectly content if the thing I draw is a cow, or a horse, or no definable creature at all. I will be content, and yet I cannot do it. I lay the sketchbook on the desk and gaze at it, deep in thought, until my eyes seem to bore right through the page before me, but still no form occurs to me. I put down my pencil and consider. The problem lies in attempting to express such an abstract conception in the form of a picture. People are not so very different from one another after all, and no doubt someone else among them all has felt the touch of this same imaginative state and tried to express it in eternal form through one means or another. If this is the case, what means might he have used? As soon as I pose this question, the word music flashes before my inner eye. Yes, of course. Music is the voice of nature, born of this kind of moment, pressed into being by its necessity. Now I realize that one should listen to and study music. Unfortunately, however, I myself am quite unacquainted with this field. I next turn my attention to the third expressive domain, that of poetry. I recall the German writer Lessing saying something to the effect that events whose occurrence depends on the passage of time constitute the realm of poetry, and propounding the fundamentalist theory that poetry and painting are essentially different. 3 Seen from this viewpoint, the realm I am urgently attempting to present to the world seems likely never to find its expression in poetry. Time may certainly exist in the mental state that gives me my delight, but it contains no events that develop through time. My ecstasy is not produced by A's ending and being replaced by B, which in turn disappears for C to be born. My joy is of a thing held motionless inside the one profound moment, and the very absence of motion means that when I try to translate the experience into common language, the material I use ought not to be arranged to flow within time. As with a picture, the poem should be composed simply by arranging objects in space. But what scene ought I bring to the poem in order to depict this nebulous and insubstantial thing? Once I achieve that, the poem will succeed even if it doesn't fit with Lessing's theory. Talk of Homer and Virgil is irrelevant. If poetry is a suitable vehicle for expressing mood, that mood need not be portrayed through chronological events. As long as the simple spatial requirements of a picture are fulfilled, the language of the poem will be adequate to the expressive task. But what does theory matter? I have largely forgotten the contents of Lessing's Laocoon, but if I were to look thoroughly into it, I imagine I'd only become confused. Since I have failed to produce a picture, I decide at any rate to try a poem, and pressing my pencil to the page of the sketchbook I rock myself to and fro, waiting for something to emerge. I continue in this way for some time, hoping somehow to be able to move the point of my pencil from where it rests on the page, but quite without success. The experience feels rather like suddenly forgetting the name of a friend, having it on the tip of your tongue but being unable to produce it. You know that if you give up trying, the elusive name is likely to sink forever beyond reach. Imagine you set out to mix a gruel of arrowroot. At first your chopsticks merely churn the powder and feel no resistance from the liquid. If you persevere, however, the liquid slowly grows viscous, and your hand grows heavier as it stirs. Continuing to stir without pause, you finally reach the point where you can stir no longer, and in the end the arrowroot gruel in the pan will, of its own accord, positively rush to glue itself to your chopsticks. This is precisely the process of writing a poem. At last my lost pencil begins to find its way on the page, in fits and starts, gathering impetus as it goes, and after 20 or 30 minutes I have produced these few lines. The spring is at its height. My sorrow burgeons with the grasses. Soundless, the flowers fall in the quiet garden. The lute lies neglected in the vacant room. In her web the spider sits unmoving. An ancient scroll of smoke curls at the eaves. When I read it over, I realize it is in fact a string of images that could easily become a picture. I might as well have made it a picture in the first place, I decide. Then I wonder why a poem was easier to create than a picture. Having reached this point in my poem, the rest seems likely to follow without too much effort. But now I feel the urge to write sentiments that are impossible to transpose into a picture. After much hesitation over the possible choices, I finally produce the following: sitting silent in this quiet world. I sense a fate light deep within me. The human world is thronged with busyness. Yet how could one forget such peace? By chance I gain a day's serenity, and learn how hectic is the life of man. Where might I place this deep expansive calm? It belongs only to the realms of eternal sky. I read it through from the beginning. It is not without merit, but it seems rather too dry and dull to really convey the exalted state I've just been in. While I'm at it, I decide to try another poem. Gripping my pencil, my eyes stray unconsciously toward the doorway, and at this moment the door is slid open, and I catch a sudden glimpse of a beautiful shape beyond, slipping quickly across the 3 feet or so of open space. Good heavens! By the time my eyes have fully turned to take this in, the door is open and the figure is disappearing. The movement is over almost before my eyes can catch it, and the shape passes and disappears in an instant. My gaze is now riveted on the doorway, all thoughts of poetry abandoned. Within a minute, the figure re-emerges across the way. Silent and serene, the woman walks along the second-floor balcony opposite me, clad magnificently in a long-sleeved formal kimono. The pencil falls from my hand. I stare across the 12 yards or so of courtyard garden, breath held, while the lone figure appears and disappears, parading gracefully to and fro at the balcony railing as the evening spring sky, already freighted with cloud, grows gradually heavier with the promise of rain. The woman has said not a word, nor sent so much as a glance in my direction. She walks so softly that even the sound of her own silk hem trailing behind her would not reach her ears. She is too distant for me to distinguish the details of the dyed colors in the lower half of the kimono. All I can make out is the transition, where the kimono's basic color merges into the design below, a delicate shading reminiscent of the boundary between night and day, that boundary that she too treads. I know not how many times this figure in her trailing kimono walks up and down the long balcony corridor, nor how long she has performed this strange perambulation in her astonishing clothes. Nor have I the least idea what her intention might be. It's a weird feeling, to watch her endlessly repeating her ritual, coming and going, appearing and disappearing in the frame of my doorway, so decorously and so silently, for reasons beyond my ken. If her action is some lament for the passing spring, why should it take such an insouciant form? And why should this nonchalant pose choose to clad itself in such finery? Is it perhaps gold brocade that makes the obi at her waist so startle the eye as this spectral shape, this hue of the dying spring, for an instant entrancingly brightens the doorway's dark depths? Moment by moment the gaudy brocade comes and goes, swallowed now into the blue depths of evening, into unpeopled remoteness, now returning hither through those far reaches of space. The sight is redolent of the twinkling stars of spring that sink at dawn into depths of violet sky. At last the heavens are on the verge of opening to swallow this bright shape into the realm of darkness. There is something supernatural about the scene, the figure dressed in clothing appropriate to a vibrant life surrounded by golden screens and silver candelabras, each instant of spring's evening worth a wealth of gold, willingly fading without fear or resistance from the visible world. As I gaze at her through the swiftly gathering darkness, she seems to linger serenely in one place, then tread with the one measured step, without haste, without bewilderment. If she indeed has no knowledge of the impending peril of the darkness, she is the height of innocence. If she knows but does not feel it as a danger, she is uncanny. Loitering thus, so serene and poised, between the realms of being and non-being, her original dwelling must surely be that blackness, and this temporary phantom is now in the act of returning into the obscure darkness of its true home. The real nature of this figure is suggested by her kimono, whose bewildering pattern inexorably melts and disappears into inky black. Another image, when a beautiful woman falls into lovely slumber and in the midst of this sleep draws her last breath in this world, we who watch by her pillow are stricken with grief. But if to the given pains of existence 1,000 pains are added in dying, the woman herself, weary of pointless living, would feel with those who watch over her that relief from her suffering would be nothing but merciful. But how does a young child who dies easily in his sleep deserve his fate? A child drawn down to the realms of the dead in sleep has lived its precious life in a blind moment, with no preparation for death. If someone must be killed, let him first feel the absolute karmic inevitability of the fact, resign himself, and die with a prayer on his lips. If before your eyes is only the vivid fact of death, without the conditions that naturally lead to death, then you long not to chant the last rites over the dying but to cry out and summon back those feet that have already stepped halfway into the other world. Perhaps she who is slipping unaware from her mortal into her immortal sleep suffers by being called back like this, being dragged unwillingly by the chains of existence that she was in the act of severing. Be merciful, she may think, and do not call me, but let me quietly sleep. And yet we long to call. When the woman appears once more beyond the doorway, I have just such an urge, to call her back and save her from the depths of unreality, but when her dreamlike form glides across the 3-foot wide space before my eyes, I find myself speechless. The next time, I decide, but then once more she slips past. Why can't I speak? I wonder, and as I wonder she passes again. She passes without the least show of awareness that someone might be watching, or might be gripped by anxiety for her. She passes in seeming indifference to the likes of me, neither burdened by my fears nor pitying me for them. As I watch, summoning myself again and again to call, the clouds at last began to spill the moisture they have so long withheld, and soft threads of rain closed their melancholy curtain about that distant form. Chapter 8. I take tea with the master of the house, Mr. Chioda. The other guests present are the abbot of Kankaiji Temple, who introduces himself as Daitetsu, and a layman, a young man of 24 or 5. Taking a right turn along the corridor from my door and then a left at the end has led me to the old gentleman's room, which is down at the far end. The room is a 6-mat one, about 12 feet by 9, and a large, low sandalwood table occupies the center, imparting an unexpectedly cramped feeling to the space. Instead of the usual cushions surrounding it, there's a carpet with a woven flower design. It is no doubt Chinese. In its center is a hexagon containing a scene depicting a rather strange house and an odd willow. The surrounding ground is an almost steel blue indigo, and at each corner is a brown circle, through which is woven an arabesque design. I doubt that such a thing would actually be found in a Chinese sitting room, but it is certainly most intriguing here, in place of the normal cushions. Just as the worth of an Indian cotton print or a Persian wall hanging lies in its slight oddness, so this flowered carpet's generosity and lack of fuss constitute its tastefulness. All such Chinese household furnishings, indeed, have the same rather dull and unimaginative quality. One is forced to the conclusion that they're the inventions of a race of patient and slightly slow-witted people. The special value of these objects is the way they daze and bemuse the viewer. Japan's works of art, on the other hand, are created with all a pickpocket's fine-tuned alertness. The West creates on a grand and detailed scale, which can never quite free itself of the reek of worldliness. Such are the thoughts in my head as I take my seat. The young man places himself beside me, halfway down the length of the carpet. The abbot is seated on a tiger skin, whose tail spreads past my knees while the head lies beneath the old gentleman. All the gentleman's hair seems to have been removed and transplanted onto his face, so that his cheeks and chin are smothered in a thick tangle of white beard. He is carefully arranging the teacups on their little saucers on the table before him. We have an unaccustomed guest staying, so I thought I'd take the opportunity of asking you to tea, he says, turning to the abbot. Thank you for sending someone along to invite me. I haven't gotten around to visiting for quite some time, and I was just thinking I must call in today. The abbot is close to 60, with a round face and softened features reminiscent of one of those quick, freehand ink sketches of the Bodhidharma. He seems on familiar terms with the old gentleman. This is your guest, I presume? The old gentleman nods as he lifts the little red clay teapot and lets the precious greenish amber liquid trickle 2 or 3 drops at a time into the teacups. I am pleasantly aware of its elegant aroma gently invading my nostrils. The abbot speaks to me immediately. You must be feeling lonely here in the countryside by yourself. Ah, well, I say, unable to summon any real answer. If I say I'm lonely, it will be a lie, but if I say I'm not, a long explanation will be required. Not so, your reverence, our host chimes in. This gentleman's come here to paint, so he's quite busy in fact. Ah, is that so? That's good. Would you be an artist in the Nanso school? 1. No, I managed to reply this time. The abbot wouldn't understand it if I told him I painted in the Western style, I decide. No, he's in that Western style, the old gentleman says, coming to my aid once more in his role as host. Ah, Western, eh? That's the sort of thing Kyuichi does, isn't it? I saw his work for the first time the other day. Very nicely done, I thought. No, they're just boring little things, the young man protests, breaking his silence. So you showed the abbot one of your poor pieces, did you? The old man inquires. Judging from his attitude and the way he speaks to the young man, they're probably related. I didn't exactly request a viewing, he came across me when I was sketching at Mirrorpool, says Kyuichi. Is that so? Well now, the tea is poured. Do have some, the old man says, placing a cup before each of us. There are no more than 3 or 4 drops of tea in each, though the cups themselves are very large. The glaze is a light grey ground, daubed all over with burnt sienna and pale yellow brushstrokes that may have been intended as a painting or merely as a pattern, reminiscent of a half-formed devil's face. They're by Mokibe, he remarks simply. Point 2. They're delightful, I say, in equally simple praise. There are a lot of fake Mokibes around. Look at the base. You'll find his signature there. I lift it up and turn it toward the paper-screened window to see. The warm shadow of a potted aspidistra falls across the screen. Sure enough, when I twist my head to look closely at the base, I see the single small character Moku. A signature is not really important in appreciating a work of art, but dilettantes apparently set great store by it. I bring the raised cup directly to my lips. A connoisseur with time on his hands will elegantly taste this rich, delicately sweet liquid, ripened in the precise temperature of the hot water, by letting it run 1 drop at a time onto the tip of the tongue. Most people believe that tea is to be drunk, but that is a mistake. If you drop it gently onto the tongue and let the pure liquid dissipate in your mouth, almost none of it remains for you to swallow. Rather, the exquisite fragrance travels down to permeate the regions of the stomach. Using the teeth on solid food is vulgar, while mere water is insipid. The best green tea, on the other hand, surpasses fresh water in its delicate, rich warmth, yet lacks the firmness of more solid substances that tire the jaw. Tea is, in fact, a marvelous drink. To those who spurn it on the grounds of insomnia, I say that it's better to be deprived of sleep than of tea. I next turn my attention to a bluestone tea sweets dish that the old man has now produced and is passing around. It is nothing short of astonishing to consider the fine dexterity of the master craftsman who has carved such a large piece of stone to such thinness, and with such delicate precision. Spring sunlight shines through the translucent stone, seemingly captured and held there within its depths. It is right that such a plate remains empty. I brought this out to show our guest here. He's been kind enough to admire my celadon, so I thought I'd bring out a few more things for him to see today. What celadon would that be? The abbot asks. Oh, you mean the tea sweets dish? I'm fond of that one myself. Yes. By the way, I don't suppose Western pictures can be painted onto sliding doors, can they? If they can, then I'd like you to do me one. Well, I think I could do it if asked, but I don't know that it would be to the abbot's taste. There's no point in slaving to produce such a thing if he then declares that he doesn't like Western painting. I don't think Western painting would work for sliding doors, I say. You don't, eh? Yes, that's true. I suppose it would be a bit garish if it's the sort of thing I saw Kyoichi painting the other day. My paintings are terrible, protests the youth earnestly, looking most embarrassed. I'm just messing around. Where is that pond you were speaking of? I asked the young man, from idle curiosity. It's a lovely tranquil place, in the valley behind Kankaiji Temple. It's just that I studied Western painting a little at school, you see, so I thought I'd stop by there and try my hand when I was feeling bored one day, that's all. And this Kankaiji Temple. That's where I am, the abbot breaks in. A fine place. You can take in the whole sea at a glance from up there. Come and have a look while you're staying. It's only a half mile or so from here. From the corridor out there you can see the stone steps going up to it. Have you noticed? Could I come for a visit sometime? Of course, of course. I'm always there. Mr. Shioda's daughter calls in quite a lot. Speaking of which, he says, turning to the old gentleman, there's no sign of your Nomi today. She's all right, I hope? She must have gone out somewhere. Did she go to your place by any chance, Kaiichi? No, she wasn't there. Probably off on a walk by herself again, says the abbot with a laugh. She's got strong legs, has Nomi. When I was out at Tanemi the other day for a ceremony, I thought to myself, good heavens, that looks like Nomi there on Sugatami Bridge, and sure enough it was. She was wearing straw sandals and had her skirts tucked up behind. What are you doing loitering around here, your reverence? She says to me, quite out of the blue. Where are you off to? Gave me quite a surprise, haha. Where in heaven's name have you been, dressed like that? I ask. I'm just back from picking wild parsley, says she. Here, I'll give you a bit. And she suddenly shoves a muddy bunch of it into my sleeve, haha. Dear me, says old Mr. Shioda, with a pained smile. Then he abruptly rises to his feet and turns the subject hastily back to curios. I rather wanted to show you this. He reverently takes down from the sandalwood bookcase a little bag made of fine old patterned damask. It seems to contain some heavy object. Have you ever seen this, your reverence? What on earth is it? An inkstone. That's so. What sort of inkstone? It was a favorite piece in Seinyo's collection 3. No, I haven't seen that one. It has a spare lid done by Shunsui. No, haven't seen it. Show me, show me. The old man tenderly undoes the bag, revealing a corner of the russet stone within. That's a lovely color. 10K, would it be? 4. Yes, and there are 9 strike spots. 9, repeats the abbot incredulously, evidently deeply impressed. This is the Shunsui lid, says Mr. Shioda, displaying a thin lid in a figured satin wrapping. A Chinese poem of 7 characters is written on it in Shiransui's calligraphic hand. Ah, yes. He had a fine hand though, mind you. Kyohei wrote a better one 5. You think so, do you? I'd say Seinyo was the worst of them. That tendency to cleverness made him vulgar. Nothing interesting in him at all. The old gentleman chuckles. I know you're no fan of Seinyo, so I changed his scroll for a different one today. That's so. The abbot turns to look over his shoulder. The alcove is a simple recess in the wall. On its polished board stands an old Chinese copperware vase, its surface elegantly tarnished, with a 2-foot-high branch of magnolia blossom arranged in it. The scroll hanging behind it is a large work by Sarai, 6 on a backing of subtly glowing figured silk. The calligraphy is on paper rather than the more usual silk, but the scroll's beauty lies not only in the indisputable skill of the writing itself but also in the delightful harmony between the backing and the paper, which has aged with the passage of time. The figured silk itself is not particularly wonderful, but it seems to me to achieve its fine quality through a combination of faded color and a softening of the effect of the gold thread, so that any original gaudiness has dimmed, allowing a certain austerity to assert itself. The two little ivory scroll ends protrude starkly white against the tea-brown background of the earth wall, while before the scroll softly floats the pale magnolia blossoms, yet the overall effect of the alcove is so calm as to be almost gloomy. "Sarai, is it?" says the abbot, his head still turned to look. "You mightn't care much for Sarai either, but I thought you'd prefer it to the Sony." "Yes, Sarai's certainly far better. Calligraphers from this particular period always have a certain refinement, even if the writing's poor. Was it Sarai who said Kotaku is a great Japanese calligrapher, while I'm just a poor imitator of the Chinese?" 7. "No idea. My own calligraphy certainly wouldn't be worthy of such a boast," says the abbot with a laugh. "Speaking of which, your reverence, who did you learn from?" "Me. We Zen priests don't read textbooks or do copying practice and such like, you know. Still, someone must have taught you. When I was young, I did study Kozen's calligraphy for a while. That's all, though. But I'll do a piece anytime someone asks me." The abbot laughs again. "Now, could you let us have a look at that 10K? At last the damask bag is removed. All eyes go to the ink stone that emerges. It's roughly twice as thick as a normal stone, about 2.5 inches. The 5-inch width and 8.5-inch length are fairly standard. The lid is polished pine bark that still retains its scaly texture, and on it in red lacquer are written 2 characters in an unknown hand. Now, this lid," the old gentleman begins, "this lid is no ordinary lid. As you can observe, there's no question that it's pine bark. Nevertheless, his eyes are on me as he speaks. As an artist, I'm unable to summon much admiration for a pine bark lid, no matter what its provenance and story, so I say, a pine lid is a little inelegant, surely?" The old gentleman holds up his hands in horrified remonstrance. "Well, if it's merely a common pine lid, I do agree. But this one was made with Seigneu's own hands, from pine stripped from the tree in his very own garden while he was in Hiroshima. Well then, I think to myself, Seigneur was a vulgar fellow, it seems. Rather daringly, I remark, if he made it himself, he could get away with making it look a bit clumsier, I think. It seems to me he needn't have gone to the trouble of polishing up the rough patches to make them shine like that." The abbot laughs heartily in instant agreement. "True enough," he says. "It's a cheap-looking lid." The young man turns his eyes pityingly to the old gentleman, who rather crossly takes the lid off and puts it aside. Now at last the ink stone itself is revealed. If there is one thing particularly striking to the eye about this ink stone, it is the craftsman's carving on its surface. In the center, a round area of stone about the size of a pocket watch has been left standing flush with the height of the edges, and it is carved into the shape of a spider's back. 8 legs go curving out in all directions, the foot of each consisting of one of the stone's characteristic shrike spots. The ninth spot is visible in the center of the spider's back, a yellow stain like a trickle of juice. The remaining area around the spider's body and legs is carved back to a hollow about an inch deep. Surely this deep trench is not where the ink is intended to be ground. 2 whole quarts of water would not fill it. I imagine one must dip a little silver ladle into an elegant water pot, trickle a drop onto the spider's back, and apply the ink stick there to create a precious pool of ink. Otherwise, though it is an inkstone in name, the object would be nothing more than a simple ornament for the desk. Just look at the texture of it, look at those spots. The old gentleman almost drools with delight as he speaks. Indeed, the color's beauty increases the more you gaze. If you breathed on that cold, lustrous surface, your warm breath might instantly freeze there, leaving a puff of cloudiness. The most astonishing thing is the color of the shrike spots. They are not so much spots as subtle shifts in color where the spot emerges from the surrounding stone, a transition so gradual that the eye finds it almost impossible to locate the point at which the deceptive moment of change occurs. Metaphorically, it's like gazing into a translucent plum-colored bean cake, at a bean that lies embedded deep within. These shrike spots are so precious that the presence even of 1 or 2 is highly prized. There would be almost no examples of a stone with 9. What's more, the 9 are distributed equidistantly over the surface, so apparently systematically that the effect could well be mistaken for a human artifact, a masterpiece of nature indeed. It's certainly a splendid thing, I say, passing it to the young man beside me. It's not just pleasing to the eye, it's delightful to touch as well. Would you understand such matters, Kaiichi? The old man inquires with a smile. I've no idea, Kyuichi blurts out, ducking the question with a rather desperate air. He puts the inkstone down in front of him and gazes at it, then picks it up and hands it back to me, perhaps acknowledging that it's too fine for his ignorant eyes. I run my hands over it carefully one more time before returning it reverently to the abbot. He rests it delicately on the palm of his hand till he's finished examining it. Then, apparently not yet sated, he picks up the edge of his grey cotton sleeve, rubs it fiercely over the spider's back, and gazes in admiration at the resultant luster. The color really is marvelous, isn't it? Have you ever used this? Asks the abbot. No, I scarcely ever get the urge to actually use it. It's just as I bought it. Yes, I can understand that. This would be considered rare even over in China, I should think, wouldn't it? Quite so. I'd like one of these myself, I must say, the abbot remarks. Maybe I'll ask Kyuichi for one. How about it, Kyuichi? Could you buy me one? Kyuichi gives a chuckle. I could well be dead before I get a chance to find you your inkstone. Yes, indeed. An inkstone will be the last thing you have on your mind, eh? Speaking of which, when do you set off? I'm going in 2 or 3 days. See him off as far as Yoshida, won't you, Mr. Chiyoda, says the abbot. Well, I'm an old man, and normally I wouldn't bother these days, but it may be the last time we meet, who knows, so I'm planning to go along and say farewell, in fact. There's no need to do that, uncle. So he's the old gentleman's nephew. Yes, I can see the resemblance between them now. Oh, go on, urges the abbot. Do let him see you off. It would be quite simple if you went down the river by boat. Isn't that so, Mr. Chiyoda? Yes, it's not easy over the mountains, but if we went around the long way by boat. The young man no longer objects to the offer, he simply remains silent. Are you going over to China? I venture. Yes. This monosyllable isn't an entirely satisfactory response, but there seems no need to delve further, so I hold my tongue. Glancing at the papered window, I register that the shadow of the aspidistra has shifted. Fact is, Mr. Chiyoda breaks in on his nephew's behalf. With this war, you know. He enlisted as a volunteer, so he got called up to go. And so from him I learn the fate of this young man, who is destined to leave for the Manchurian front in a matter of days. I've been mistaken to assume that in this little village in the spring, so like a dream or a poem, life is a matter only of the singing birds, the falling blossoms, and the bubbling springs. The real world has crossed mountains and seas and is bearing down even on this isolated village, whose inhabitants have doubtless lived here in peace down the long stretch of years ever since they fled as defeated warriors from the great clan wars of the 12th century. Perhaps a millionth part of the blood that will dye the wide Manchurian plains will gush from this young man's arteries, or seethe forth at the point of the long sword that hangs at his waist. Yet here this young man sits, beside an artist for whom the sole value of human life lies in dreaming. If I listen carefully, I can even hear the beating of his heart, so close are we. And perhaps even now, within that beat reverberates the beating of the great tide that is sweeping across the hundreds of miles of that far battlefield. Fate has for a brief and unexpected moment brought us together in this room, but beyond that it speaks no more. Chapter 9. Are you studying? She inquires. I've returned to my room and am reading one of the books I brought along, strapped to my tripod on the journey over the mountain. Do come in. I don't mind in the least. She steps boldly in, with no hint of hesitation. A well-formed neck emerges above the kimono collar, vivid against its somber hue. This contrast first strikes my eye as she seats herself before me. Is that a Western book? It must be about something very difficult. Oh, hardly. Well, what's it about, then? Yes, well, actually, I don't really understand it myself. She laughs. That's why you're studying, is it? I'm not studying. All I've done is open it in front of me on the desk and start dipping into it. Is it interesting to read like that? Yes, it is. Why? Because with novels and such like, this is the most entertaining way to read. You're rather strange, aren't you? Yes, I suppose I am a little. What's wrong with reading from the beginning? If you say you have to start at the beginning, that means you have to read to the end. What a funny reason. Why shouldn't you read to the end? Oh, there's nothing wrong with it, of course. I do it too, if I want to know about the story. What do you read if it isn't the story? Is there anything else to read? There speaks a woman, I think to myself. I decide to test her a little. Do you like novels? Me, she says abruptly. Then she adds rather evasively, yes, well not very much, it seems. You're not clear whether you like them or not, then? Whether I read a novel or not is neither here nor there to me. She gives the distinct impression that she takes no account of their existence. In that case, why should it matter whether you read it from the beginning, or from the end, or just dip into it in a desultory way? I don't see why you should consider my way of reading so strange. But you and I are different. In what way? I ask, gazing into her eyes. This is the moment for the test, I think. But her gaze doesn't so much as falter. She gives a quick laugh. Don't you understand? But you must have read quite a lot when you were young, I say, abandoning my single line of attack and attempting a rearguard action. I like to believe I'm still young, you know. Really, you are pathetic. My arrow has gone wide again. There's no relaxing in this game. Finally pulling myself together, I manage to retort, it shows you're already past your youth, to be able to say that in front of a man. Well, you're far from young yourself, to be able to make that remark. Is it still so fascinating, for a man of your age, all this talk of being head over heels and heels over head, and having pimples, and such adolescent stuff? It is, yes, and it always will be. My. So that's how you come to be an artist, then? Absolutely. It's because I'm an artist that I don't need to read a novel from cover to cover. On the other hand, wherever I choose to dip in is interesting for me. Talking to you is interesting too. In fact, it's so interesting that I'd like to talk to you every day while I'm staying here. Come to think of it, I wouldn't mind falling in love with you. That would make it even more interesting. But we wouldn't need to marry, no matter how in love with you I was. A world where falling in love requires marrying is a world where novels require reading from beginning to end. That means that an artist is someone who falls in love unemotionally. No, it's not you and emotional. My way of falling in love is non-emotional. The way I read novels is non-emotional too, which is why the story doesn't matter. I find it interesting just to open up the book at random, like this, like pulling one of those paper oracles out of the box at a shrine, see, and read whatever meets my eye. Yes, that does look like an interesting thing to do. Well then, tell me a little about the place you're reading now. I'd like to know what intriguing things emerge. It's not something one should talk about. Same with a painting, the worth of the thing disappears completely if you talk about it, doesn't it? She laughs. Well then, read it to me. In English? No, in Japanese. It's tough to have to read English in Japanese. What's the problem? It's a fine non-emotional thing to do, after all. This could be fun, I decide, and proceed to do as she asks, falteringly translating aloud the words on the page. If there were ever a non-emotional way of reading, this is it, and she too, of course, will be hearing it with a non-emotional ear. The woman emanated tenderness. It flowed from her voice, her eyes, her skin. Did she accept this man's help to lead her to the boat's stern in order that she might view Venice in the dusk, or was it to send this electricity coursing through his veins? This is just a rough translation, you understand, because I'm reading non-emotionally. I may skip a bit here and there one. That's perfectly all right. I won't even mind if you add something wherever you feel inclined. The woman leaned beside the man at the railing of the boat. The space between the two was narrower than that of a ribbon fluttering in the breeze. Together they bade farewell to Venice. The palace of the Doges glowed a soft red, like a second sunset, and faded from view. What's a Doge? It doesn't matter what it is. It's the name of the people who used to rule Venice long ago. They ruled for generations, I'm not sure how many. Their palace still stands there. So who are this man and woman? I've no more idea than you do. That's why it's interesting. It doesn't matter what relationship they've had till now. The interest lies in the scene before us at this moment. They're being here together, just like you and me. You think so? They seem to be in a boat, don't they? In a boat, on a hill, what does it matter? You just take it as it's written. Once you start asking why, it all turns into detective work. She gives a laugh. All right then, I won't ask. The usual novels are all invented by detectives. There's nothing non-emotional about them, they're utterly boring. Well then, let's hear the next bit of your non-emotional story. What happens now? Venice continued to sink from sight, until it became nothing more than a faint smudge of line against the sky. The line broke now into a series of points. Here and there, round pillars stood out against the opal sky. At last, the topmost bell tower sank from sight. It is gone, said the woman. The heart of this woman bidding farewell to Venice was free as the wind. Yet the now hidden city still held her heart in a painful grip, and she knew she must return there. The man and the woman fixed their gaze on the dark bay. The stars multiplied above them. The gently rocking sea was flecked with foam. The man took the woman's hand, and it felt to him as if he held a singing bowstring. This doesn't sound very non-emotional. Oh no, you can hear it as non-emotional if you care to. But if you don't like it, we can skip a bit. No, I'm quite happy. I'm even happier than you are. Now where was I? This part is somewhat trickier. I'm not sure I can, no, this is too difficult. Leave it out if it's hard to read. Yes, I won't bother too much. This one night, the woman said. One night. He cried. Heartless to speak of a single night. There must be many. Does the woman say this, or the man? The man does. She doesn't want to go back to Venice, see, so he's comforting her. The man lay there on the midnight deck, his head pillowed on a coil of rigging rope. That moment in his memory, the instant like a single drop of hot blood when he had grasped her hand, now swayed in him like a vast wave. Gazing up into the black sky, he determined that come what may he must save her from the abyss of a forced marriage. With this decision, he closed his eyes. What about the woman? The woman seemed as one lost and oblivious to where she strayed. Like one stolen and borne up into thin air, only a strange infinity, the rest is a bit difficult. I can't make sense of the phrasing. A strange infinity. Surely there's a verb here somewhere. Why should you need a verb? That's enough on its own, isn't it? There is a sudden deep rumble, and all the trees on the nearby mountain moan and rustle. Our eyes turn to each other instinctively, and at this moment the camellia in the little vase on the desk trembles. An earthquake, she cries softly, shifting from her knees and leaning forward against the desk where I sit. Our bodies brush each other as they shake. With a high-pitched clatter of wings, A pheasant bursts out of the thicket close by. Wasn't that a pheasant? I say, looking out of the window. Where? She inquires, leaning her pliant body against mine. Our faces are almost close enough to touch. The soft breath that emerges from her delicate nostrils brushes my mustache. Non-emotional, remember, she says sternly as she swiftly straightens herself. Of course, I promptly reply. In the aftermath of the little earthquake, the startled water in the hollow of the garden rock continues to sway gently to and fro. The shock has risen up through the water in a swelling wave that does not break the surface, creating instead a fine lacework pattern of tiny ripples in irregular curves. Were it to exist, the expression tranquil motion would describe this perfectly. The wild cherry tree that steeps its calm reflection there wavers in the rocking water, stretching and shrinking, curving and twisting. Yet I am fascinated to observe that however its shape changes, it still preserves the unmistakable form of a cherry tree. What an enchanting sight, so beautiful and shifting. This is how motion should be. If we humans could only move in that way, we could move all we liked, couldn't we? She says. You have to be non-emotional to move like that, you know. She gives a laugh. You're certainly fond of this non-emotional, aren't you? I wouldn't say you were exactly averse to it either. That performance with the wedding kimono yesterday, for instance. But here she suddenly breaks in coquettishly. Give me a little reward. What for? You said you wanted to see me in my wedding kimono, didn't you? So I went out of my way to show you. I did. I gather that the artist who came over the mountains put in a special request to the old lady up at the tea house. I can produce no appropriate response, and she goes on unhesitatingly. What's the point of throwing my all into trying to please someone so hopelessly forgetful? She speaks in a mocking, bitter tone. This is the second barb that has struck home, hitting me fair in the face, and the tide of battle is turning increasingly against me. She somehow managed to rally, and now that she holds the upper hand, her armor seems to have become impregnable. So that scene in the bathhouse last night was purely kindness too, was it? I try, scrambling to save myself from the perilous situation. She is silent. I do apologize, I go on, seizing the moment to advance when I can. What should I give you as reward, then? However, my sally has no effect. She is gazing with an innocent air at the piece of calligraphy by Daitetsu that hangs over the door. After a pause she murmurs softly, bamboo shadow sweeps the stair, but no dust moves. Then she turns back to me and, as if suddenly recollecting, stutteredly raises her voice. What was that you said? I'm not going to be trapped again, however. I try taking my cue from the tranquil motion of the water after the earthquake. I met that abbot just a while ago, you know. The abbot from Kankaiji? He's fat, isn't he? He asked me to do him a Western painting for his sliding door. These Zen priests say the most peculiar things, don't they? That's how come he can get so fat. I also met someone else there, a young man. That would be Kaiichi. That's right, yes, I say. How much you know? Hardly. I only know Kyuichi. I'm quite ignorant otherwise. He doesn't like talking, does he? He's just being polite. He's still a child. A child? He's about the same age as you, surely. She laughs. You think so? He's my cousin, and is off to the war, so he's come to take his leave of the family. He's staying here, is he? No, he's in my older brother's house. So he came here specially to take tea, then. He likes plain hot water better than tea, actually. I do wish father wouldn't invite people to tea like that, but he will do it. I bet his legs went numb from all that formal sitting. If I'd been there, I would have sent him home early. Where were you, in fact? The abbot was asking about it, guessing you must have gone off for a walk again. Yes, I walked down to Mirapool and back. I'd like to go there sometime. Please do. Is it a good place to paint? It's a good place to drown yourself. I don't have any intention of doing that just yet. I may do it quite soon. This joke is uncomfortably close to the bone for mere feminine banter, and I glance quickly at her face. She looks disconcertingly determined. Please paint a beautiful picture of me floating there, not lying there suffering, but drifting peacefully off to the other world. Hey! Aha, that surprised you, didn't it? I've surprised you, I've surprised you. She rises smoothly to her feet. 3 paces take her across to the door, where she turns and beams at me. I just sit there, lost in astonishment. Chapter 11. I set off for a stroll, to savor the soft dusk of this mountain village. Climbing up the stone steps of Kankaiji Temple, my mind produces the following lines for a poem in Chinese, counting the stars of spring. I gaze up, 1, 2, 3. I have no particular business with the abbot, nor any inclination to indulge in idle conversation with him. I've simply stepped out of the inn on impulse, letting my straying feet carry me where they will, and found myself at the base of these stairs. I pause here a while, to run my hand over the stone pillar on which is carved the prohibition found at the entrance to every Zen monastery, no alcohol or pungent vegetables permitted beyond this gate. But then a sudden flood of happiness sets me climbing the stairs. In Sterne's novel Tristram Shandy, the author claims that this book was written in the highest accordance with the will of God. The first sentence was created by himself, he says. The rest simply came to him, written while his thoughts were fixed on the Lord. He had no plan of what to write, though it was he who wrote the words themselves were the Lord's, and therefore he holds no responsibility for them. Well, my stroll is of precisely this nature, though the irresponsibility is compounded in my case by the fact that I do not pray to God. Sterne managed very neatly to avoid responsibility by blaming it all on the Lord, while I, who have no God to take the blame on my behalf, simply cast mine into a passing ditch. Nor do I exert myself in climbing the temple steps. Indeed, if I found that the climb caused me any real effort, I would immediately give up. Pausing after I take the first step, I register a certain pleasure and so take a second. With the second step, the urge to compose a poem comes upon me. I stare in silent contemplation at my shadow, noting how strange it looks, blocked and cut short by the angle of the next stone riser, and this strangeness leads me to climb a further step. Here I look up at the sky. Tiny stars twinkle in its drowsy depths. There's a poem here, I think, and so to the next step, and in this manner I eventually reach the top. Once I arrive, I recall how, years ago, I visited Kusamakura and spent some time calling on the big Zen temples there. I think it was at a sub-temple in the Engakuji temple complex that I was plodding, just as now, up the long stone staircase that led to the temple gate, when a priest in saffron robes with a flat, bald head appeared above me. I climbed, and the priest descended. As he passed me, he demanded sharply, "Where are you going?" My feet paused as I responded simply, "To see the grounds." "There's nothing to see," he instantly shot back as he swept on. Somewhat disconcerted by his extreme curtness, I continued to stand there on the step, gazing at his receding figure, watching the flat head bob to and fro, until he was lost among the cedar trees below. He never once turned to look back. Well, I thought, as I made my way through the temple gate, Zen monks are certainly intriguing. They have a fine brisk way about them. I looked around. There was no sign of life either in the main hall or in the spacious living quarters. Joy filled my heart at that moment. How deeply refreshing to know that someone so plain-spoken existed, to be dealt with so wonderfully bluntly. My joy had nothing to do with any understanding of the truths of Zen Buddhist teaching. Indeed, I had not the faintest idea of its meaning at that time. It sprang from the simple fact that this flat-headed priest delighted me. The world is chock full of unpleasant people, the pestering and spiteful, the pushy types, the fussers and nigglers. Some make you feel they're simply a waste of precious space on this earth. And it's always this sort who really throw their weight around. This fellow will consider the space he takes up to be a matter for tremendous pride. He feels his great purpose in life is to set a detective to work peering at your backside for years on end, counting your farts, and then he'll step out and stand there in front of you and make a song and dance about how many times you farted in the last 5 or 10 years. If he says all this to your face, you can at least take note of what he's saying, but you'll find him insinuating things behind your back. Complaining just makes him more insistent. If you tell him to drop it, he nags all the harder. "Okay, I understand," you cry, but, no, he just goes on and on about the number of farts. And this he claims to be his highest ambition in life. Well, everyone has their ambitions, and all I can say is, this fellow would do far better to drop his harping on about farts and fix on some goal that will shut him up. It's only common courtesy to put a hold on your ambition if it's going to cause problems for others. And if you say that your goal can't be fulfilled without bothering others, then I will say that mine requires me to fart, and there goes all hope for Japan. To go strolling like this through a beautiful spring evening without the slightest goal in mind is the essence of cultured refinement. My sole aim is to let pleasure and amusement arise where they will, and if they don't, so be it. If a poem occurs to me, that poem will become my aim. If it doesn't, then that can be the aim. What's more, I am bothering no one. This must surely be the nature of a truly legitimate goal. That of fart counting is one of personal attack, while that of farting is justifiable self-defense. My present goal in climbing this flight of stairs to Kankaiji Temple is to open myself, in the best Zen tradition, to the karmic moment. When I reach the top, having gained the beginnings of a poem along the way, the faintly shimmering spring sea lies spread below me like an unrolled sash. I enter the temple gate. I've lost interest in finishing off my poem, so my new aim promptly becomes to abandon it. The stone path that leads to the abbot's quarters is bordered on the right by an azalea hedge, and beyond this probably lies the graveyard. To the left stands the main worship hall. The top of its tiled roof glimmers faintly, and gazing up, I have a sense that 1,000,000 moons have cast themselves over 1,000,000 roof tiles there. From nearby there comes a pigeon's insistent cooing. It seems they live somewhere under the roof. I may be wrong, but the ground beneath the eaves appears to be scattered with small white dots, pigeon droppings, perhaps. Standing directly below the eave stripline is a row of weird, shadowy shapes. They're certainly not small plants of any sort, nor do they look like trees. They make me think of those little demons depicted praying to the Buddha in the painting of Iwasa Matabe, one who have now left off their Nembutsu prayer and are waving their arms in the dance that accompanies it. Point 2. They dance ceremoniously, forming a line that stretches from one end of the worship hall to the other, while their shadows dance ceremoniously in a line beside them, in exact replica. The hazy moonlit spring night must have seduced them to abandon the accustomed bell and book with which the Nembutsu worshippers traveled the land, gathering together on the moment's impulse to come to this little mountain temple and dance. When I approach, I realize they are in fact large cactuses, 7 or 8 feet high. They look like green cucumbers the size of gourds that have been crushed, molded into the shape of flat spatulate rice paddles, and strung together vertically, reaching skyward, their handles pointing down. How many paddles would it take before their full height is reached? They look as if they might this very night force their way up through the eaves and climb to the tiled roof. Each new paddle shape, it seems to me, must appear quite suddenly, leaping into place on the plant in the space of an instant. It seems inconceivable that an old one would bear a tiny new one, which would grow slowly larger with the passing years. Those strings of paddle shapes are utterly fantastical. How can such an extraordinary plant exist? And so nonchalantly, what's more. When asked what is the nature of the bodhidharmas coming from the west, a monk is said to have replied, the oak tree in the courtyard. If asked this question myself, I would reply without a moment's hesitation, a cactus in the moonlight. In my youth, I read a travel journal by one Chao Bushi 3 and I can still recite some of it. It was in the 9th month, sky deep, dew pure and limpid, mountains empty, and the moon bright. When I looked up, all the stars were shining hugely, as if poised directly overhead. Outside the window a dozen bamboo stems, ceaselessly rustling as they brushed together. Beyond the bamboo, plum trees and palms crowded thick, like wild-haired witches. I and my companions looked at each other. We were all unnerved, and could not sleep. We departed as dawn was breaking. Here I pause in my mumbled recitation and suddenly laugh. With a small adjustment in time and place, these cactuses might have unnerved me in just such a way and sent me fleeing down the mountain at the sight of them. I touch a spine with my finger and feel its irritable stab. I turn left at the end of the paved path and arrive at the priest's quarters. Before it stands a large magnolia tree, whose trunk must be virtually an arm span in width. It stands taller than the roof of the building beside it. I look up into branches, and beyond them more branches, and there beyond this tangle is the moon. In another tree the sky would not be visible through such an interlacing, and the presence of flowers would obscure it still further, but between all these multi-layered branches is empty space. The magnolia doesn't try to confuse the eyes of the upward-gazing beholder with a jumble of twigs. Even its flowers are clearly visible, though I stare up from far below, each flower is a single, distinct form. I couldn't count how many of these single flowers throng the whole tree, in what state of bloom, yet each remains a separate entity apart, and between them the faint blue of the night sky is clearly visible. The flowers are not a pure white, such stark whiteness would be too cold. In absolute whiteness we can discern a ploy to arrest and dazzle the eyes of the viewer, but magnolia flowers are not of this order. These blooms modestly and self-deprecatingly avoid any extremity of whiteness with their warm creamy tinge. I stand a while on the stone paving, lost in wonder, gazing up at this towering proliferation of tender flowers that plumb the very depths of heaven. My eyes hold nothing but blossoms. Not a leaf is to be seen. The following haiku occurs to me, my eyes lift to see. A sky that is entirely magnolia blooms. Somewhere the pigeons are cooing softly together. I step into the priest's quarters. The door has been left unlocked. This world seems to know no thieves. No dog has barked either. Anybody here? I cry. Silence is the only reply. Excuse me. I then try. The pigeons continue their soft coo-coo. I raise my voice and call again, and now from far away comes an answering cry. Yes, I have never before received this sort of response when I called at someone's house. Finally, footsteps are heard along the corridor, and a taper casts its light beyond the wooden partition. A small monk pops suddenly into view. It's Ryanen. Is the abbot in? He is. What brings you here? Could you let him know that the painter from the hot spring inn is here? The painter. Come on in. Are you sure you shouldn't ask him first? No, it'll be fine. I slip off my shoes and enter. You're not very well mannered, are you? He says. Why? You should put your shoes neatly together. Here, look at this. He points with his taper. Pasted onto the middle of the black pillar, about 5 feet above the earth floor of the entrance area, is a quartered piece of calligraphy paper on which some words are written. There. Read that. Look to your own feet, it says, doesn't it? I see, I say, and I bend down and arrange my shoes neatly. The abbot's room is beyond a right-angle bend in the corridor, beside the main worship hall. At the entrance Ryanen reverently slides open one of the paper doors and makes a low obeisance on his knees. Excuse me, but the painter from Shioda's is here, he announces, in a tone of deep deference that strikes me as rather funny. Is that so? Let him come in. I replace Ryanen at the entrance. The room is tiny. There's a sunken hearth in the middle, with an iron kettle singing quietly on the coals. The abbot is seated beyond it, a book in his hands. Come on in, he says, removing his glasses and laying the book aside. Ryunan. Yees. A cushion for the guest, please. Yees. Ryanan's drawn-out cry floats back from somewhere in the distance. I'm glad you've come. You must be quite bored here. The moonlight was so lovely, I just wandered over. It's a fine moon, he says, opening the paper screens at the window. Nothing is visible outside except 2 stepping stones and a single pine tree. The flat garden ends at what appears to be a precipice, with the hazy moonlit sea directly below. Looking out produces the sensation of a sudden expansion of the spirit. The lights of fishing boats twinkle here and there out at sea, seeming at the far horizon to lift into the sky and imitate the stars. What a lovely view. It's a waste to keep the shutters closed, Your Reverence. That's true. But then, I see it every night. This view would still be lovely however many nights you saw it. If it were me, I'd stay up all night just to gaze. The abbot laughs. Of course you're an artist, so we're bound to be a bit different. You too are an artist, Your Reverence, when you find such a view beautiful. Yes, that's true enough, I suppose. Even I can do the odd Bodhidharma painting. Look at this one hanging here. This scroll painting was done by a predecessor. It's very good, isn't it? I look at the Bodhidharma painting on the scroll in the little alcove. As a painting, it's dreadful. All you can say for it is that it's not vulgarly ambitious. The painter has made not the slightest attempt to conceal its clumsiness. It is a naive work. This predecessor must have been a similar type, someone who cared nothing for pretension. It's an unsophisticated painting, isn't it? That's all our sort of painting requires. It only needs to reveal the painter's nature. It's better than the sort that's skillful but worldly. The abbot laughs. Well, that's a good enough compliment, I suppose. Now tell me, are there such things as doctors of painting these days? No, there aren't. Ah, I see. Because I met a doctor the other day. Really? I suppose a doctor is a fine thing to be, eh? Yes, I imagine so. You'd think there'd be doctorates for painters too. I wonder why there aren't. In that case, there ought to be doctorates for abbots as well, oughtn't there? He laughs again. Yes, well, maybe so. Now what was his name? The fellow I met the other day? I must have his name card here somewhere. Where did you meet him? In Tokyo? No, here. I haven't been to Tokyo for 20 years or more. I hear those things they call trains are running these days. I wouldn't mind taking a ride on one to see what it's like. There's nothing very interesting about them. They're noisy things. Well, you know the saying, the dogs in a misty country will bark at the sun, the cows in a hot country will pant at the moon. I'm a country fellow, so I'd probably have a hard time coping with trains, in fact. Oh, I'm sure you'd cope perfectly well. They really are very boring things. Is that so? Steam is pouring from the iron kettle. The abbot takes a pot and cups from the nearby tea chest and proceeds to make us tea. Have a cup of coarse leaf tea. It's not the delicious tea that Mr. Shioda makes, mind you. I'm sure it's perfectly fine. You look as if you wander about a lot. Now, is that in order to paint? Yes. I take along the equipment when I go walking, but I don't mind if I don't actually paint any picture. Ah, so it's only half serious, then? Yes, you could say that. I hate submitting myself to all that fart counting, you see. Even a Zen practitioner such as the abbot is apparently at a loss to comprehend this expression. What do you mean by fart counting? If you live in Tokyo for a long time, you get your farts counted. How so? I laugh. It wouldn't be so bad if it was just counting, but then they go on to analyze your farts, and measure your asshole to see if it's square or triangular, and so on. Ah, you're talking about hygiene, are you? Not hygiene, no. I'm talking about detectives. Detectives? So it's the police, is it? Now, what's the purpose of policemen, eh? Do we really have to have them? No, artists certainly have no need of them. Nor do I. I've never had any cause to bother one. I'm sure not. Still, I don't care if the police want to go counting farts. So what? They can't do a thing to you, after all, unless you've done something wrong. It's dreadful just to think something might be done to you on account of a simple fart, though. When I was a young monk, my superiors always told me people never get anywhere with their training unless they can throw themselves into it with the same abandon it would take to expose your guts on the street in the heart of Tokyo. You should do the same sort of rigorous training, Then you wouldn't need to go traveling. If I were a real painter, I could achieve that sort of state whenever I wanted. Well then, you should do so. I can't if people are counting my farts all the time. The abbot laughs. Well, there you are, you see. Now, that lass of Shioda's, where you're staying, young Nomi, after she came back from the marriage, all sorts of things used to plague her mind, till in the end she decided to come to me for some Buddhist instruction. And now look at her, she's come a long way with it. These days she's got a fine head on her shoulders. Well, I did get the impression she was no ordinary woman. No, she's very sharp. A young monk studying under me by the name of Tyan was led to a moment of great crisis in life on account of her, you know. It's proved to be an excellent aid to enlightenment for him, I understand. The pine casts its shadow across the quiet garden. The distant sea glimmers faintly, with a shifting light that seems to answer and yet not answer the lights that fill the sky. The fishing boat's far lamps wink on and off. Look at the shadow of that pine. It's beautiful, isn't it? Is that all? Yes. It's not simply beautiful. It cares not if the wind blows. I drink off the last of my tea, place the cup upside down on the tea tray, and rise to my feet. We'll see you as far as the gate. Ryunin. The guest is leaving. When we step out of the priest's quarters, the pigeons are cooing. There's nothing more enchanting than pigeons, you know. I have only to clap, and they all come flying over. Here, I'll show you. The moonlight has grown brighter still. In the deep silence, the magnolia tree proffers its tangled branches of cloudy blossoms to the vault of the sky. Suddenly the abbot startles the very center of the clear spring night with a loud clap. The sound dies on the breeze, and not a single pigeon appears. Not coming, eh? Funny, I thought they would. Ryanan looks at me with a hint of a smile. The abbot appears to think pigeons can see in the dark. What a happy innocence. At the gate we part. I turn to watch their two rounded shadows, one large and one small, follow each other back down the stone path and disappear.